the CGA Tour. Now your host, Glen Alexander.
Well, hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the CGA Tour Podcast. As always, here I'm your host, Glen Alexander, coming to you live from Oklahoma State's campus today. So the background looks a little bit different, but I'm joined by Trevor here. He's the BYU official podcaster for the College Huddle and the Big 12 Huddle Network, and previewing Oklahoma State's matchup tomorrow night against the Cougars, or today, depending on when you're listening to this. Trevor, how's it going?
Doing awesome, and thanks for having me on. I love all the work you do for Oklahoma State and for the Big 12 across the College Huddle and promoting the conference.
Thanks so much. Yeah, no, it's hopefully the third best conference in the nation in football and the first best conference, or the number one conference in the nation in basketball. Although the SEC looks a little bit like they might be trying to challenge that a little bit this year. But mainly here, I wanted to bring you on to ask you about, of course, the matchup tomorrow night against BYU and Provo. And then also how you think BYU will kind of do in the conference this year, because it seems like Oklahoma State is at a rebuilding point. And I want to give all the Oklahoma State listeners kind of not only some hope, but some ideas of, hey, ways we could get back to prominence in the Big 12, as well as it seems like BYU has kind of garnered a lot of attention. And I mean, you guys have the number one overall recruit next year coming in too, which when we got the number one overall recruit in Cade Cunningham, it seemed like a little bit of like, man, just 1% it was going to work at just so many different times. Whereas you guys getting the recruit seems like an NIL deal, and want to ask you about that here as well too. But first and foremost, how do you think BYU is going to do in the Big 12 this year?
Oh, man, I don't know. And I would say right now, Cougar fans are starting to fret a little bit. The expectation going into the season is, hey, this is a squad that, for anybody who's not familiar, we lost our head coach to Kentucky, which was a dream job where he really played. And everybody kind of knew BYU was not his end game, but nobody really thought he was going to get the Kentucky job either. So I don't think we can completely blame him for going, great on him. And it seemed like it was terrible because, okay, we're going to lose our incoming recruits, maybe some of our outgoing guys, and it's just all going to blow up after BYU had a very good surprise showing first year in the Big 12, made it to March Madness, had a disappointing out, but you felt like, oh, if we could just bring this back. Then they hired Kevin Young from the Phoenix Suns, the top highest paid assistant coach in all of the NBA, was interviewing for head coaching jobs and decided to come to BYU, and, it just completely flipped the narrative. His recruiting, he's just continued to recruit the highest ever, rated recruits to BYU, and he just keeps outdoing himself until, as you mentioned, with AJ Dybantsa, I don't think he'll be outdoing that one again anytime soon. That'll be really hard to beat. Getting the next somebody who's proclaimed kind of as the next LeBron James, so to speak, probably won't be doing that again in the near future. But just completely flipped the narrative on its head with the program. Having said that, I think people were realistic. Even though he's brought in a stellar coaching staff with a lot of varied experience from international to NBA to G League, through the the high school circuits with at some of the national stage there. He's really brought in a lot of people with broad experience and a broad range of networking with different players and recruits, which I think has allowed them to reach out and pique the interest of some players that maybe traditionally would not have looked at BYU. And it's just been a lot of excitement, tons of buzz around this program. Now we're into the season. Obviously, blew out all the teams we were supposed to blew out, and had a lot of wins there. Out of our significant matchups in the out of conference, we played Ole Miss. That one went to overtime where we kind of let it slip away. BYU arguably, as any close game, had its shots to finish in regulation. And then NC State won that one, but then got blown out at Providence, our one true road game of the out of conference games this season. So, and then in conference, blew out Arizona State to start off conference play. Got blown out by Houston terribly. That wasn't terrible because, it is Houston, and, sometimes, you get teams on a good night, on a bad night. But what's been really causing a lot of consternation in BYU Nation is the fact that BYU lost a close competitive game to Texas Tech at home and then let one again slip away against TCU. And so the fact that this team just kind of has had some struggles, I feel like a lot of, and I feel like a lot of teams have just had a lot of 3-point success against BYU, and BYU's not hitting free throws. But I would say most of it seems to be that the team is not gelling just yet. It was, even though we brought back a lot of our veterans and our point guard, Dallin Hall, and then kind of our quote unquote junkyard dog, Richie Saunders, as well as Foose and some other pieces that we have, and just supplemented a lot of great talent around them. It is still a lot of new guys. And I think one of the things that BYU had going for it last year is that there wasn't a big turnover from that roster. He brought in a few new pieces, but by and large, it was the same guys we had the year before that underperformed. And so nobody had high expectations, but there was definitely a chemistry to that team. They knew what they were doing. They had an identity and they knew how to play with each other. And so it seems like some of it is an issue. I mean, one of the glaring things is, as I mentioned, our junior point guard who's been starting for 2 years, a lot of experience, but then you bring in a really high recruit coming over from Spain. Well, he was playing in Spain. He's Russian, Yegor Demin, and he is a projected lottery pick. I mean, for a while they're talking about him top 5, top 3. It's kind of slipped a little bit as his performance has slipped, but he's a very rangy, he's tall player, but he plays best with the ball in his hands. And so, again, we have our point guard as well as Yegor Demin, 2 players who play best on ball. And I mean, the vision that he has, the passes that he can make, but then again, he's also looked like he's gotten flustered a bit in certain moments when pressured or, in late clock situations. And, whereas Dallin Hall's been there, done that with that classic shot over in Kansas to help kind of seal that game over what's his face, what's their center?
Oh gosh, Hunter
Dickinson. Sorry.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it just seems to be kind of, and we've noticed the coaching staff kind of playing around with the lineup a little bit, with the minutes a little bit. So it seems they're still trying to find the best lineup, and it might continue to switch depending on the matchup with teams. We feel like we have a lot of guys that are switchable. And Kevin Young, so our head coach, he mentioning that he's coming from the NBA, he's definitely bringing that NBA mindset where it's more positionless and his philosophy there. But I think that's taking some adjusting because you're coming against it, taking NBA system, putting it into college, but it's a very different, there are some different rules, you're different caliber of players and everything. So it's probably going to take some time for all those players to adjust and get used to it. So I think all of that together is there's just still some growing pains with this team. You definitely see the potential. And I would say, again, the Texas Tech game, BYU to make it into March Madness, it feels like they've really got to at least go 10-10 in conference play, and we're already behind schedule. I mean, we're 1-3 right now, having lost 1 at home, and so now we're going to have to be able to win on the road, and we lost a winnable one against TCU this last weekend to kind of balance the Texas Tech loss. So that is all a very long-winded way of me saying BYU is desperate and this really feels like a must-win. They have to win this game against Oklahoma State at home. Otherwise, their path to getting to March Madness and staying in kind of the middle, hope preferably top 8 of the conference is going to be very tough.
Yeah, you guys rank 6th and 7th in offense and defense in the Big 12, respectively. And Oklahoma State does not rank in the top half. I mean, we rank 13th and 14th, respectively. So to say that we have high expectations of winning tomorrow night in Provo is far from the truth. I mean, if we pulled off an upset, it'd be a great upset. When we beat K-State at home for our first Big 12 win, I was going, you know what? Maybe we can go to Utah this weekend and win that one Saturday, but instead we lose by 20, and we lose what really is just a very poor shooting game. The one thing about this Oklahoma State roster that I've really noticed so far is that there's just a bunch of new guys, and that's not telling anyone anything they don't know. We have 3 guys coming back from last year's roster onto this one. I mean, Jamartin Keller, he plays a lot and he gets some minutes. Bryce Thompson was injured last year. He plays a lot, gets some minutes. The third guy, Connor Dow, haven't seen really anything out of this season. He's that third guy who came back. And there's so many new guys on the roster. The way that K-State decided to play Abu was just wild. Our center is, he is a big dude. He's 6'10", 6'11", 250. And K-State tried to guard him single-handedly in the post with a guy who was like 215, 220, with a guy who was also a little bit shorter. And it did not work out. He had a career high at 27 points. I don't think BYU will try something for as long as K-State did to give us the same type of success that we had down in the post. And when we can make 9 of 21 from the field shooting threes, we're going to win most games, as most college basketball teams will. Now what I would say is that's not shooting 33s. That's not shooting 40, of course. It's nowhere close to an NBA amount of threes. But I remember BYU last year just shooting threes, running gun, just as fast as possible. And, of course, with that Mark Pope team and him leaving to Kentucky, I was going, you know what? You never want to be that guy where you're like, okay, well, they looked good last year, but oh my gosh, maybe there's a chance we could beat them this next year because they've got some turmoil they're going under. We had some turmoil in the new head coach as well with Steve Lutz. I'm going, hey, you know what? Like, schematically, maybe we can kind of play with BYU a little bit. But instead, Kevin Young, who I'm born in Salt Lake City, has Salt Lake City ties. So that kind of makes sense why he left the NBA and some head coaching opportunities in the NBA to go to BYU. He seems like he's going to be a great coach for you guys, really able to recruit. But how's the play style change from last year versus this year? You said the kind of positionless basketball and kind of bring that NBA mindset over?
That's the idea. I don't know if they're there yet. BYU still shoots a relatively high clip, and I guess I haven't compared to how many we've shot over, we've averaged compared to last year, but I think it's safe to say it's not as many threes as we were shooting last year, but still at a high clip. It just doesn't feel like we're hitting them nearly as well. And again, there were some injuries. I'm bringing him back. I mentioned Yegor Demon and some of his struggles. He's really struggled since coming back from his injury. That might play into, part of the issues that we've seen with this team. But yeah, I'd say, yes, they're trying to get there on offense, and depending on the matchups, we will go low when we have to. We've got Foose who, when you get the right matchups, he can go down and post up with anyone. He's not the tallest, but he's got long arms, and he just knows how to position himself. And it seems like he's got just such touch that he can get whatever he wants once he gets, within even a few feet of the basket. However, we've seen him in clutch moments miss some bunnies, as well as other players on the team too, in clutch moments of the game. So that hasn't been a continuous part of our identity as much as I would say even last year. I'd say it kind of depends on matchups, but I think when we're at our best is when we've got movement and some cutters, because we have guys that can make passes and we have guys that can finish under the rim, making those, or then, or you cut, you put pressure on that defense, and then you kick it out. You keep the ball moving. You can find the open three. I think BYU still does well with that. But it's, what happens in between, or when the shots aren't falling, and it just seems, too many guys getting flustered. So that's on offense. So they are still working to that. I think playing that ideal system and what Kevin Young wants to see. And then on defense, we have a coach that was coaching over in Africa, and he invented this defense called the peel and switch. And, I watched videos on it, so I wish I could tell you that I know how to explain it perfectly, and I don't. If you're interested, go Google it. But the peel and switch defense, which I think at times the players are still a little confused at where they're supposed to be. You're still adjusting to kind of maybe a new philosophy. And so I don't know. That's a long story short is I don't know. And this team, like I said, is still trying to find its identity. Still a lot of talent. I'd say BYU has even more talent from top to bottom. I think without question than we did last year. And some of our veteran players that have stuck around are even better. Like Richie Saunders, who, as I mentioned, is our junkyard dog, just doing kind of the scrappy work. He has led in scoring for a couple games this season, getting in the 30s on one game. Was at, I think, Texas Tech. No, maybe not. Maybe it was Arizona State. So it's kind of finding the hot hand and staying with it, but just playing team ball. And right now we just seem out of sorts. So I'm really hoping that this team can kind of find something in this game against Oklahoma State.
Yeah, I think the one thing that you guys will find is that you are the best team in rebounding in the conference, at least in combined opponent rebounds, and combined team rebounds. You guys are fourth. We don't rank anywhere close to that in either metric. So I think rebounding wise, you guys will do pretty darn good. And then turnovers, your assist to turnover ratio is up there at 6th in the conference, but ours is 16th. And then the turnover margin wise, we're 7th. You guys are 12th, but we're really splitting hairs there, kind of with that margin because it's very all close together. I think the one area that we will really struggle in though is rebounding, because you guys are rebounding the ball well. It doesn't necessarily matter if you're shooting the ball that well. You're just going to have way more opportunities to put the ball in the basket. And that at the end of the day is, I think what this Oklahoma State team needs more than anything else is we needed a couple more transfers for a couple of taller guys. And we just, we could just always use big man depth. It seems like every single year I've ever rooted for Oklahoma State since, basically since I can remember, but I'll say since 2000, it's been, hey, we could use some rebounding depth. We've either got a guy who's 6'6", Michael Cobbins, playing center and sometimes listed at 6'8", or we've got a guy who's, just great guards all around. Marcus Smart, Terrell Harris. I mean, guys made the league, but the rebounding part of it is something that I think tomorrow night you guys will definitely handle us with really well. And then shooting the ball, I mean, opponent 3-point field goal percentage, we're allowing 35%, and that's 14th in the conference. And then, I mean, you guys are allowing, you're right there with us there on opponent 3-point percentage. But the team 3-point percentage overall, that's where we're 16th. I mean, we're 31% from the field from 3, and BYU is 35%. So I think there's just so many stats that do not go Oklahoma State's way in this, where we're the similar teams that we are all up against when looking at all the other stats and percentages. We're right there with the Utah, K-State, Arizona at 1 point team 3-point percentage. But the Big 12 as a whole is just so good. Here's how do you think you'll be like year over year? I mean, getting AJ next year, and of course, it seems like recruiting at a really good pace.
Yeah, I mean, I think year over year, BYU will continue to progress as the system gets more implemented. The coaching staff is going to have a better feel for how to, I think, take those ideals they want to instill in this team, but also make those modifications, make it fit better to the college game. And so I think that'll help getting a little more continuity. So that is one issue that we could run into if he, continues to recruit high recruits, is that you're getting guys that are one and dones. Like right now, we've got 2 that are projected to be drafted next year. Now, obviously, if their draft stock falls or anything or injury, whatever, they could elect to come back for another year. But that, obviously, you get loads of talent, but then that's more and more new faces that you have, which is, I think, what Kentucky was running into with Calipari, bringing in new freshman classes full of one and dones every year, but not really doing much with it. Now, BYU, I don't think will be quite at that level. But yeah, bringing in AJ Dybantsa, now that doesn't guarantee anything. He is just one player. But in basketball, I mean, that's a great thing, is one player can have a much larger impact than in a game like football, where there's so many guys on the field, so much happening. One guy comes on and it really can swing things. But this is, assuming BYU is going to be able to retain the talent, its top players and the talent that it wants to retain, that we should have some really good depth. which is something BYU has struggled with in the past. It hasn't been getting, we've been able to get some pretty solid guys, maybe under recruited or just really wanted to go to BYU, but, playing great team ball and maybe punching a little bit above their weight class, but it was the lack of depth. Whereas this team really feels like there is a lot of depth. There's a lot of guys, and there's, we're hoping that after another year, they're going to be growing into their own. So yeah, all that, having said all that, I think BYU should continue to progress. Another top recruit that BYU is bringing in next year is Xavier Staten, who is out of the Las Vegas area, but he just relocated to Hurricane, Utah, where AJ Dybantsa is playing in prep school. So they're now on the same team, getting in a semester of playing on the same team together prior to coming to BYU. And so that is something that hopefully will pay dividends when two of your, arguably most important players are going to hopefully already have a level of chemistry, and they'll be able to build off of that together. And then you put that in what is hopefully a team that's a little bit more of a well-oiled machine. But obviously, BYU's got to figure things out this year. If they just go and completely lay an egg, that could impact, obviously, recruiting. I mean, at what point does AJ Dybantsa reconsider? But by all accounts, he's really locked in at BYU, that he apparently signed weeks before he had made his announcement, and it stayed locked up, that he was pretty locked in on coming to BYU and playing for Kevin Young. And I think a lot of this goes back to, because you asked how recruiting is going to go, and how's that going to go for a program like BYU? And obviously BYU does have some things that people view as limitations in terms of having the honor code and not being able to, participate in certain activities that a lot of college students want to. But the way Kevin Young has pitched this is he's not running away from that. He's embracing that and using it to come out, guys, and saying, hey, here at BYU, we're not going to have the distractions. You can come in, you can focus on your game. We know what it takes to be a pro. We're going to teach you those things. We're going to help you play at your best and get you ready to be drafted and go to the NBA. And you're not going to let those other things come in the way or stand in between you. And so you're finding guys that are saying, no, that's all right. I don't want those things right now. The best thing I can do is invest in myself and eliminate those distractions. And so that's not going to be for everybody. There's plenty of people that are going to be great players that still want to go and have another experience, or feel like, hey, they can avoid those things and be in different places, and that's fine. But there are guys that's resonating with, obviously, when you get a guy like AJ Dybantsa, when you get some of these other players, Yegor Demin, Xavier Staten, and so on. And so, as well as other guys that BYU's in the mix on, even for guys that they're not getting, the fact that they're even in the conversation with some of these top guys is awesome. And you'd mentioned NIL. NIL is part of it. BYU does have some really deep boosters, but from what I've seen from, the more official reports and not the rumors flying around on Twitter is that I can't remember exact amounts. I want to say 4 or 5 million was kind of in that range, but it was that all of his final schools were, for AJ Dybantsa, that is, were in the same financial range, that it wasn't money that ultimately tipped the scale. It wasn't like one team came in and a school came in and just completely outbid the others. It was, they were all there. They all kind of met that criteria. And so then came down to where he wanted to play. And, his parents were involved. They're very family oriented. And I think they liked that aspect of the environment at BYU. And again, that won't be for everybody, but I think there's lots of players who that does speak to and it's resonating with. And obviously, because, we have several examples of people committing to BYU. So now the trick is going to be putting that all together on the court, continue to perform, do well, get to the tournament, do well in the tournament, and then be able to build off that and keep recruits. And so we'll see how Kevin Young and his coaching staff are able to do that and adjust this season. Because while a lot of BYU fans are already kind of getting nervous, I still feel like there's a chance for BYU to rally, pull things together, get over that learning curve. But the margin of error is getting thinner, because you've really got, every game you're getting that much closer to the end of the season, and if those losses keep stacking up, you can't erase those from your schedule. But anyway, did that answer your question? Because I went on another.
Yeah. No, I mean it does. I think the thing with me as an Oklahoma State fan and an Oklahoma State lifer is when we got Cade Cunningham, it was like, okay, well, there's so many things that had to go right for Cade to come. But also we had a similar situation we scouted Cade early. He's from a nearby state in Texas. Mike Boyden was like the first guy to offer him. Then Mike Boyden is on the assistant coaching staff for Brad Underwood. Brad Underwood comes to Oklahoma State. Cade commits to Oklahoma State. Underwood leaves. Cade still commits to Oklahoma State with Boyden. And Boyden was able to get high-profile recruits year in, year out. That was not the issue whatsoever. It was just more of maybe some would say circumstantial. COVID didn't help. The NCAA investigations, getting suspended from March Madness and postseason for a year didn't help either. But I don't want to talk about the downfalls of Boyden. I just want to talk about how that Cade had to recommit to OSU. When the NCAA investigations were announced, he had to recommit. Everyone on the Oklahoma State's team did. Then, of course, he ends up playing in March Madness. But then the year after that, we're banned from the postseason, and things kind of slide. I'm really curious though with AJ, because this seems like you guys offered him, it looks like $3.8 million what he ended up signing for. It's not some $10 million figure that I had seen rumored before or anything crazy like that. But he's from Massachusetts. He did not grow up necessarily as a Mormon. He definitely has said in interviews that he really loves his religious studies teacher. Massachusetts growing up, but he reclassified to be a year earlier coming into college than he normally would have been. But he's been a number one guy all this time. Boston College was the first team to offer him. It wasn't like it was, BYU saw him out through the rough, kind of just like the Cade analogy I'm going with here. When I see a Big 12 team do well and recruit really well at this extreme level where, AJ, I think if he enters the draft this year, maybe he's even talked about as top 5 pick, and that's at 17 years old. What do you think made the difference? Why do you think BYU was kind of on the inside track here and he ended up signing with BYU? Because you're right, it wasn't as just some first take analogy of he signed because of the money. It's nothing like that. Everyone was kind of that same range as you said, and you've got John Calipari going to visit him. You've got all the big schools going to visit him at the same time BYU's recruiting. You guys weren't the first there either. That would mean a lot to him or something like that. What do you kind of think made the difference, if anything?
I don't know, other than, the message that Kevin Young has is, BYU offers, you can avoid the distractions, and then his experience in the NBA. I know he's some top players, especially his time at the Suns. You had, that'll come in his corner. They make phone calls. They're calling KD. They're calling Chris Paul. They're calling, whoever else, and the player's interested in, he's got connections with these guys. And that's not to say there aren't other college coaches. Obviously, Calipari has coached half the NBA, it feels like, at some point. So it's not like he doesn't also have connections with these guys. But speaking of which, he has former players that have come out and talking about Kevin Young saying he'd come out, and Devin Booker saying that he's like, man, I would have loved to have played for Kevin Young. And he said that publicly. And so, and he was a Kentucky guy. So I think a lot of that resonates, but it must be, his coaching philosophy, his vision for the team and for these players, and they feel and they believe in him that he can get it done. Now they've got to get it done. He's got to show he can get these players drafted. So that's still got to happen. But there's another thing was when he was newly hired, he was still coaching with the Suns in their first round playoffs, which BYU fans all had mixed feelings when he was playing. We were like, we want to root for Kevin Young to do well, but we also want to root for him to be out of the playoffs so he could just be all in on BYU. But ultimately, they lost that first round. But while he was still coaching, Dybantsa, and I don't know how he ended up doing prep school in Utah. I don't know his path to there, but for whatever reason, he was there. And so his parents came to take an unofficial visit to BYU. It was kind of unannounced. They're just like, hey, we're in Utah. It's not too far away. Let's go see BYU. I think at that point, BYU had reached out. I'm not positive on that, actually. But Kevin Young was still down there with the playoffs. He was with the team, found out they were coming, and he flew up there and met with his parents and was part of that. So it wasn't like, hey, get me on a conference call with him. We'll call him. Obviously, I can't make it right now. Like, he dropped everything, came up and met with them. And by all accounts, that first visit was very impactful on his parents, and they just liked what they saw. They liked the program. They liked the environment. And so that was already starting them off on the right foot. So had he not, like, that's like a what if, had he not said, you know what, I'm so busy right now, I got to finish this, I don't have time, like, it's the number one recruit, what, BYU's probably not going to get him anyway or whatever, like, you had a million, different reasons to rationalize, like, it's not worth me actually going up there. I can just Skype him. Does anyone Skype anymore? Zoom or whatever. But he didn't. He took the time, flew up there, and by all accounts, that was very impactful. I'm not saying that sealed the deal, but it definitely, I think, helped get BYU on the inside track with his family to start with. And so, but yeah, whatever the exact messaging is he has with these players, it really is resonating. And so, you gotta love what he's doing. And for, all the fans that, just want to kind of freak out right now because things aren't going as planned, I think you got to trust in the vision. And I think people that are, and these players are recruiting, I got to hope that they're smart enough to realize, some of these things take time. It's not going to be instantaneous. Like, let's see how things play out. I'm not going to let a few games kind of, sway their opinion. But, they do have to continue to coach this team and get them where they need to be to show that, hey, like we said, we can prep you for the NBA and to take that next step.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, he's offered May 31st. Earlier that same month, Duke offers him. I'm going through the 247 Sports timeline of events here. I'm not going to rate off every team, but like the second team overall to offer him is a true blue blood in college basketball in Michigan, and that's on April 24th, 2023. So, we're talking that, in 2024 in May, BYU offers, and that's where he ends up signing. So it's incredible. It's great for, I think, the Big 12, of course. It's great for what I think is the best college basketball conference. So I'm not trying to say, hey, when a Big 12 school gets a guy like this, like, how did it happen? It never, it happens all the time. Yeah. KU gets guys. Oklahoma State has gotten the first overall pick not too long ago. Utah's gotten number one overall picks. Now they're in the conference, going to claim them, of course. But I mean, we know there's been just so many schools, Texas when KD was around, et cetera, et cetera. The Big 12 has been that prominent basketball conference for so many years. To kind of cap it off here, how do you think BYU is going to do this season if you had to make a prediction? I'm just kind of saying, do you guys think you make the postseason March Madness or not? Because I know right now you're on a 3-game losing streak. Lost past 2 games by a total of 9 points. Might seem a little bleak, but then again, you lost at Houston, to Houston at Houston 4 days after New Year's Day. I mean, it seems like there's a couple of games that could have just really gone your way. And maybe the bad loss is TCU, but TCU is also not bad. I wouldn't say that Oklahoma State makes a run every so often, but we're probably going to finish 13th through 16th in the conference. If we finish worse than Colorado, I'd be a little disappointed, but not completely. Colorado had a top 10 pick last year in the NBA draft too. So every team's talented. Every team's loaded. But yeah, just kind of ask here.
Yeah, you don't let like one game define your season. You mentioned Oklahoma State beat BYU last year, and that was disappointing. And, it came at really cut off some momentum that BYU had going. But like you said, any team can win any game. It feels like it was, BYU blows out ASU, and then you see them taking it to Kansas, and you're right. Anybody can win. It's when you see consistent problems and see that continually showing up late in close games, I think is against teams that should be competitive. That's when you start to worry. But yeah, you're right. BYU can put it together. To go back to your recruiting question in terms of the Big 12, kind of your first part of this comment was, I think that obviously changes everything for BYU. If BYU is not in the Big 12, then maybe as much as Dybantsa likes Kevin Young and BYU, maybe he doesn't choose BYU, maybe he does. It's hard to say, but it definitely changes the dynamics. I know for football, in terms of recruiting, it's, that was one thing that when BYU and Utah were in the same conferences and the same footing, it was, they were kind of able to go after the same players. That really started to switch once Utah was in power, level football, and BYU was not. And so I think we're going to start seeing that same kind of dynamic with basketball as we've seen with football change, is that they can come in and say, hey, not only am I in a power conference, but I am in, the premier, if not one of the top, two conferences, maybe the top basketball conference, and being able to go up against, teams like Kansas and Houston and whoever else. And so that is a big selling point, one that BYU, I think, has definitely tried to leverage. And so, and BYU, you're right, we're not a blue blood. We've gone up and won a lot of battles against blue bloods. Dybantsa, some of his final schools were UNC, Alabama, not true blue blood, I would say, in basketball, but still a huge school. Xavier Staten was being heavily recruited. One of his final schools was Michigan. And so, it's pretty nice to even be in the conversation with players that are being recruited by these other schools, let alone winning those. And so I do think that Big 12 cachet helps. And to your final question, where I think BYU will end the season, I thought the preseason evaluation of BYU was fair, because I knew that even though we have a lot of talent, there's still a lot of turnover and a new system to figure out. So I thought in the top, maybe 8 or 9 in the league, which theoretically should be good enough to get into March Madness. Right now, BYU's got his work cut out for him, so they've definitely got to start figuring things out. Seems a little less likely. Now I'm kind of feeling like might be a little lower. I don't think we'll be at the dregs of the conference, but maybe a few spots lower than where we thought, unless, they're able to win some surprise wins in there. And I think they'll have to have a pretty impressive performance in the Big 12 tournament to perhaps change that narrative late in the season, where they might see themselves as one of the first few teams being kind of left out of the big dance, unfortunately. But I still think BYU can get in there and make it happen. I think they have enough talent. I think the coaching staff is talented enough, but it's just got to start happening soon.
Yeah, well, I've got two last things to end on here, is that Oklahoma State's high so far in any game this season, 72. Now, we've shot 44 free throws in a game, and we did not score 72 points in that game. When we have the conference high and the most amount of fouls committed of any team this year. Of course, it was not in a Big 12 game here, but we did commit at one point 34 fouls, 33 personal fouls at Florida Atlantic. And of course, that was in the game where we shot that many free throws. So, there's so many different ways to play Big 12 basketball. There's so many different styles. There's games where, you've got guys going in there and just really just putting up a ton of points. And you've also got games where guys are just really not scoring that much whatsoever here. So it'll be a fun game. I'm looking forward to tomorrow night. Trevor, thanks so much for joining here. I do want to say, I don't expect Oklahoma State to win. That would not be my official prediction. If I had put money on it, it would probably be, sadly, I'd put money on BYU, but I'd be trying to say, is there any way at all I can get a couple Oklahoma State guys to have some high point totals or, high free throw percentage, whatever, because I still don't think we're going to rebound that well. But, I'd be trying to still kind of find that betting line that would fit Oklahoma State as well. Are we going to have the oldest player on the court? Hey, you know what? I wouldn't say against BYU that would always be the case, but Bryce Thompson's been in college since 2020. So never know. You never know. It's definitely possible here. So thanks so much for joining. If you're not already, please follow at the CGA Tour on Twitter, Instagram, X, I guess I should say, TikTok for the time being until further notice. Of course, subscribe here below. And then if you're a Big 12 fan at all, follow at the Big 12 or at Big 12 Huddle, wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, here for all the College Huddle content, and especially for that BYU content here in the Big 12 and in the College Huddle realm, but just really BYU fans overall. You got to be following Trevor here at Sats Warrior BYU and get all of his post-game breakdowns. It's great talking to you earlier this season about Oklahoma State football. Granted, it was our closest chance of winning any Big 12 game this year in football. So I'll hats off to you guys. Wish you guys had gotten more publicity for beating Colorado in the bowl game instead of the one tweet from ESPN that was, of course, the Sanders to Hunter highlight as they were down 27-7. But nonetheless, here, Trevor, thanks so much again for joining, and we'll catch you guys again soon.
All right. Thanks.